Hey guys, it's Rod from Huntington Company, and I'm doing a quick wristwatch check today, and we are looking at the reference 5520 Rolex Air-King. So let's get into it. So yeah, let's get a better understanding of what's on my wrist. The reference 5520, a Rolex Air-King with no date, as an Air-King should be. And this example comes with a gold capped case and riveted bracelet. Yes, gold capped. Keep in mind, Rolex did not always make solid gold pieces. There were other watches in their catalog that were gold plated with a very, very thick layer of gold, so it doesn't really wear like what you think. Now today, I don't only want to talk about this piece, but I want to specifically talk about its 34mm case. I know a lot of people are going to stop the video there and not watch the rest because 34 is just too small. It's not a men's watch. It's a boy's or woman's watch. But before you think that, let me just try to change your opinion. I want to bring up three things. The first thing is the watch community and what it is to have a 34mm watch. The second thing is the value prop that they bring, and if they still bring it in today's crazy market. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is what it's like to be a real vintage watch enthusiast when it comes to these watches. So let's rewind to that first topic, the watch community. If you go into any group or forum and you bring up a 34mm watch, the majority are going to say that is too small. Why would you get that when you can get a 36mm Datejust? Some people are going to tell you that is not a men's watch, and it just doesn't make sense to wear something that small. But have they tried on a 34mm watch? And the question is, have you tried it on? Is it something that you're comfortable with? Because I can tell you now, the 34mm does not wear so much smaller than a 36mm Datejust. You have to keep something in mind when you look at case sizes. It's not just the diameter of the watch. And here's a perfect example. Take a look at Audemars Piguet's Quartz Royal Oak from the late 80s and early 90s. This ultra slim case came in a 33mm size, specifically the reference 56303. I've had plenty of these come through the shop and I've owned them and I've loved each one. And here's why. Yes, it is a 33mm case, which means it should actually wear smaller than a watch like this, but it wears so much larger and identical to a 36mm Datejust. And here's why. The Royal Oak has an integrated bracelet. This bracelet is thick, and so is the case. It does not have lugs, but it just works together and flows as one piece, almost like a bracelet. And because of that, it wears thicker on your wrist. So when you put it on, you feel like you are wearing a 36mm Rolex, not a 33mm AP. And put it next to the 16233, for example. If you look at them side by side, you would not be able to tell that the AP is that much smaller. So again, before you push away from a watch because of its size, really try it on and understand it. And make sure you ask yourself, am I not going to get this watch because I think it's too small, or because others think that this watch is just not a men's watch and will not make me feel as masculine or as confident as I would wearing something larger? Because if that's what you think, then maybe confidence is the problem and you should be more confident in yourself and what you wear, because I promise you, you look great in a watch like this. Now let's go to value prop, and a reason that you should look into a 34mm Rolex, especially if you're starting or if you want something a bit cooler in your collection. Let's go back to, let's say, a 1601. This example is a 36mm Datejust with a pipe hand dial and a white gold fluted bezel. This example could be had for around $3,500 if we're looking at a silver and clean dial. Now, if you want a color dial, we're gonna have to add $1,000 to $2,000 to that price. And even more, if you want something rare, like a Sigma or a gilt dial. These examples can be found from anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 depending on their condition. That's a big jump from your initial start at $3,500, more than double for a certain example. Now let's look at the reference 1500, a Rolex Oyster date with a 34mm case and a date at 3 o'clock. This example is beautiful, and I have one in my personal collection, a matte black Sigma dial. Let's look at a silver dial 1500, an example that can be had for around $2,500, maybe more depending on its condition. This example in a color dial, or something even a bit more rare with a nice case, box and papers, whatever it is, could be had for just a few $100s more, not thousands. Max $1,000 to $1,200 or $300 if you look for something exceptional and rare. But that watch becomes collectible and almost an investment. I don't like to say that, but it is. And you get to own it and enjoy it. So when you look at a reference 1500 and you want something a bit more special, you don't have to think over it over and over again if you want to spend that much more for something so much more special. But with a Datejust, you are. See, with a Datejust, if you want something affordable in your first Rolex, you can't jump straight to something as cool as a Buckley dial. If you have the money for it and if that's what you were looking for, then yes. But if you're starting at $3,500 and you weren't prepared to jump that high, it's going to be pretty tricky for you to accept it. But with a 34 millimeter case, you can. With a 6694, 1500, or an AirKing like this. A piece this cool, with a champagne dial, a gold riveted bracelet, and a matching case, and a pretty rare example, can still be had for not much more than a regular silver. That's pretty cool. And that to me is still a major value prop. And I think that's why these are still undervalued. And it's just because people are scared of the case size, even though they haven't really tried it and understood it. And number 3, being a real vintage watch enthusiast. See, personally, I like to say I'm very heavy in vintage horology. My personal collection is full of Cartier and Rolex and a handful of vintage military watches from World War II. And I can promise you none of those are larger than 34, maybe 35 millimeters. And I love that because that is what vintage is. See, back in that era, if we're looking at, let's say, the 40s and 50s, during World War II and post-World War II, that was what a men's watch was. A men's watch was a 34 millimeter Rolex Oyster date. A men's watch was a 34 millimeter Omega Seamaster. It was a 32 millimeter Audemars Piguet dress watch. So yes, back then, the 34 millimeter Rolex Oyster date, the 33 millimeter Seamaster, the 32 millimeter AP dress watch, that was a men's watch. And even smaller, a 23 millimeter Cartier tank was worn by people like Andy Warhol, people like Muhammad Ali. Harrison Ford wore 34 millimeter Rolex. That was a men's watch, and they are not any less masculine because of what is on their wrist. I can promise you, you won't look at Muhammad Ali any less outside of the ring with a Cartier tank on than you would him in the ring knocking somebody out. That's just something that I see when I look at vintage watches. So, if you're a real vintage watch geek, then yes, you are comfortable and happy wearing your vintage Omega Seamaster. And maybe you're not. Maybe you just found out now, looking at the 34 millimeter watches and these smaller cases, that you are not a vintage watch geek. You just love the affordable market, and that is what vintage watches bring. Maybe you were just not into the horology and the history of what Rolex used to be, and the difference and the quality and the charm that these old dials used to have. Maybe you were just looking for something affordable, and that's okay. If that's what you're doing, then the vintage market is for you. There are deals to be had in this market, and I agree. Especially with Omega Seamasters and Universal Geneves, and there's so much more that we can get into. But if you're a real watch enthusiast when it comes to the vintage watch market, then you know that these watches are cool, and they have a story, and they just wear perfectly, almost meant to be on your wrist. And that's why you love a 34 millimeter Rolex Oyster date, like I love mine. So, if you haven't found yourself in a smaller case watch just yet, and you have not tried on anything smaller than a 36 millimeter, go for it, give it a try. And make sure that you look at yourself, and only you can judge. Don't worry about what other people will think, because I promise you, if you're confident and happy, people will see it and not think a thing about the size. And if you guys are looking at something like this, please reach out and email me. I'd love to chat with you about these watches, or even check out the vintage watch shop over at huntingtoncompany.com, because we have a handful of beautiful vintage watches with a smaller case that you can get your hands on and add to your collection so you can have a little bit of fun. And that's all vintage collecting is. It's just fun. So enjoy it, and I will see you guys in the next one.